Well, shalom, my dear friends, and welcome to our Bible study on the book of Genesis. Today we're going to be in chapter 32. I will go briefly through the my PowerPoint material to provide some background and look at some maps and things like that. If you are among those who would prefer to just do the verse by verse study, I encourage you at this point to fast forward through the video until you see the word processor pop up with all of our text for today. But for those who want to stick with the PowerPoint, let's dive right in. Lately, I have been advertising my most recent book that has been published and is available to you on Amazon if you're interested. It's a very large book. It is a systematic theology of basically the Old and New Testaments. I associate this with the theology of the Nazarenes and the Essenes, two sects of Judaism in the Second Temple era. And we're studying Genesis, and I would say that probably the first third of this book is a pretty in-depth study of the events and the theology of the book of Genesis. So if you're interested in that, check it out on Amazon, and I hope and think it will bless you. This is the dispensational chart that we have been looking at for quite a while in our studies. It is about the age of promise that begins with the call of Avram, as he was called before God changed his name to Abraham. And then we follow the story of Abraham through successive generations, which included his son of promise, Isaac, and Isaac's Isaac's son, Yaakov or Jacob. And God, in the study for this evening, will change his name to Israel. Please note that the red ribbon of redemption runs through these three successive generations and continues into the fourth, running through the tribe of Judah. Judah will turn out to be the tribe of nobility. The kings of Israel will come from this tribe. Also, take note that the tribe of Levi is where the priests, the Kohanim, and the Levites, kind of their assistants in the religious life of the people, came through that tribe of Levi. And then in a few more chapters, we will encounter the story of Joseph. Joseph is a very interesting character, and in many ways, he is a type of Yeshua the Messiah, Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior. We are going to follow these families into Egypt for reasons that we will get into in later chapters. They will spend 4 generations in Egypt, and then they will come out of Egypt in a event that is known as the Exodus. And that's kind of where we're going to leave off the story here. The story of the Exodus is told in the book of Exodus, but now we are in Genesis. That's what we are most interested in. And the main theme of this portion of Scripture, this dispensation of promise, is the promises of God. Now, God's been promising things from, since the Garden of Eden and before. And he will continue to do so afterwards, after we get out of the book of Genesis, even after we get out of the age of promise, which ends at the Exodus. But the promises of God and the covenants that he makes with his people in association with those promises are the real focal point of this part of history. I just don't want you to get the idea that this is the only era in which God was making promises. He makes promises continually. And the cool thing about God is he always keeps his promises. We've been looking at some maps. This one is about the travels of Abraham from his home in Ur of the Chaldeans to the promised land. At the time that Abraham lived there, it was known as the land of Canaan because the Canaanites lived there. And we've got some promises associated with these scriptures, Genesis 13 and 15. about the boundaries, the real estate of the Promised Land, and it's much bigger than most people realize. There is a modern state of Israel that's just the smallest portion of the Promised Land. According to Genesis 13, the Promised Land will consist of everywhere where Abraham's foot falls and his eyes behold. And then in Genesis 15, it gets more geographical. It defines the Promised Land as being from the river of Egypt, which what I would say is the Nile River on the west, to the great river, the river Euphrates. And of course, it's the Euphrates River that Abraham and his family undoubtedly followed on their trip to, first of all, they went to a place called Haran, where the extended family lives and where Jacob, who's the focus of the chapters that we've been studying lately, spent about 20 years in Haran with the extended family. And then in the last couple of chapters, they returned to the Promised Land with his wives and with his children, many children, and with all of his flocks and herds that are very numerous, as we will learn today. I've included this map because it shows that Abraham and Sarah went to the Nile River, which is the western boundary of the land. So his eyes beheld it and his feet walked upon it. Then we have kind of a what should we call this? This is a large scale or small scale, large scale map of the travels of Jacob. And so what we've been interested in the most lately is his travels to Haran and back from Haran. But it will also show him going to Egypt. And that will come much later in the story of Genesis. We've got an inset in this map, and I have used that inset to give us a larger scale, smaller scale, whatever. We can see more detail in this map. And of course, here is the trip to Haran and back. Today's events are going to take place in Gilad, which is a mountain range here, kind of between the Dead Sea and the Sea of Galilee, which is right up here toward kind of in the north of the screen. It is east across the Jordan River. And here is Mizpah, where Laban overtook Jacob, and the two of them worked out a covenant. They were not the fondest of friends at that time, but they parted without violence, which is a good thing. And then in today's text, it's going to say that Yaakov and his family moved on from there, and they're going to come to a place called Penuel, which in Hebrew means the face of God. Panah is the face, and El is a shortened form of Elohim. And then also on this map is a place called Mahanaim. Hanan is the word for camp, to camp. And if you want to change the verbal root into a noun, one of the ways you can do that is to add a mem or an im sound at the beginning. So Mahan is a place of camping. And then if we put this AIM suffix on the end of it, that is called a dual ending, and it means two camps. So we're going to encounter Mahanaim today, and it just means two camps. And we'll see in our text what the significance of the two camps is. I have spent some time using some scriptural evidence to see if Jacob is not the dirty rat that I always thought he was, because the Bible calls him a tam, which is kind of a righteous, a moral, a pious, and devout man, undefiled and upright, which kind of flies in the face of everything that I have learned about Yaakov. So I've tried to make a good case for him being a tam, a righteous man. And I don't even know if I've convinced myself, but I've made an effort to do that because I think the Bible depicts Jacob in a positive light, probably much more positive than I traditionally have done. In the context of this Bible study we've been doing, is the first time I've ever realized that the Bible calls Jacob a Tom, and I understood and realized the significance of that. Even provided kind of a dictionary definition of that Hebrew word, and so we'll continue to hold up that lens to the events of Jacob's life, and he's definitely coming out more righteous as a result of this understanding than I've previously held him to be. Like all humans, he has some flaws, which we have seen and we will continue to see in his life. But we'll continue to do that, continue to see whether Jacob is a Tom or not. We also have the family tree of Abraham. It starts with his dad, Terah. Here's Avram before his name was changed, and Sarai before her name was changed to Sarah. Abraham has a child by Hagar, Sarai's maidservant. That's Ishmael, and he is the ancestor of the Arab nations of the Middle East. Avram and Sarai have a child of promise named Yitzhak. We've kind of studied his life. Well, he married Rivka, and they had two sons. One was named Esav, and the other was named Yaakov. And we're going to talk about some of the characteristics of Esav today, but just to kind of clue you into that. When he is born, he's described as a red and hairy person. So he was born with a lot of hair, probably red hair, but probably also kind of a reddish, ruddy complexion. And he's also said to be very hairy. So we'll talk about some of those characteristics today. We've also got a chart here of Yaakov's wives. His favorite wife, and I say that without reservations, it's not a good characteristics. It doesn't look good on Jacob, and it's not good for any of the women in his household. But his favorite was Rachel. He found it was love at first sight with her. He was the one that she was the one that he wanted to marry, and planned to do that. Worked for her, worked for her dad Laban for 7 years to receive Rachel as a reward. Although the arrangement was that he would make kind of a down payment of working for a short time and then do the rest of the 7 years after the marriage. But because Leah was the older daughter in the culture of Haran, she needed to be married first. And so Laban slipped her in to the dark tent on the wedding night, and Yaakov ended up sleeping with Leah. From the descriptions in the Bible, Rachel is the pretty one, and Leah is the, how shall we say this positively, the plain one, the ordinary looking one. You know, I don't think she was ugly by any means, but each one of these girls had a maidservant that was, I don't know, kind of like a wedding gift that Laban gave to his daughters. So Zilpah, and I'm sure these girls knew these maidservants all their lives, but Zilpah also is going to sleep with Yaakov and give birth to some sons. Leah has lots of sons, and they're all named there. Rachel is barren for the longest time. So her maidservant Bilhah actually has children before Rachel does. And then eventually God has mercy on Rachel and opens her womb, and she has Joseph, who is born in Haran. And then Benjamin isn't born until the family moves down to Canaan. And of course, this chapter is we're in the story of their moving south back into the promised land. I spent some time making some material that makes a case for Jacob taking his wives immediately. I'm not going to read through this today. It will take too much time, but if you're interested in reading it, I encourage you to pause the video for the next 3 frames, and I will leave each of these 3 frames up momentarily to give you time to pause and read through the frames at your own speed and comprehension. So go ahead and pause if you want to read those. Now you can read that one. And now you can read that one. I think that's the last one. Yes, it is. Okay, time for us to get to our text for today. And once again, we are using the Accordance Bible software. It's got some really great features on it, especially if you're interested in the biblical languages. So we have an English version of the Bible here that we'll use as our main text. It is the New King James Version, which I think is my favorite English version of the Bible. Then we've got the standard Hebrew text. This is the Biblica Hebraica Stuttgartensia, the Masoretic text of the Old Testament here. I've also got a Greek text of the Septuagint, and then we've got Dake's Study Bible notes there in case I come across something that I can't explain. We'll see if Finus Dake can explain it. So first verse of Genesis 32. So Yaakov went on his way. That would be from Mizpah in Gilead, the mountain range that we showed on the map. He went his way, and the Malachim, the angels of Elohim, met him. When Yaakov saw them, he said, "This is God's camp." And we talked about the word camp, and here it is in the Hebrew. The verbal root is hana. If we want to turn that verbal root into a noun, which this is a noun, then we add the mem in the front, the im, and we get machane. So that would be one camp. That's the singular. So so Yaakov says, this is God's camp, singular, machane. This is actually in what's called the construct case, which means the camp of Elohim, the camp of God. In this text, the English text just says God's camp, which is correct. And he called the name of that place Mahanaim. And it hasn't explained to us yet why he calls it Mahanaim instead of Mahane. Mahanaim is the dual form of the word camp, which literally means two camps. And as we continue on here, we'll see why Jacob called it Mahanaim instead of Mahane. Then Yaakov sent messengers. Interestingly enough, the word for angel is malach, and the word for messengers here is malachim, just the plural of that. But it seems quite evident from verse 1 that these angels are actually angels. They are messenger angels. And then it says in verse 3 that Yaakov sent messengers, malachim, but I think these are humans, human messengers. So just calling an entity a malach doesn't mean that it's like a celestial angel. Angels, angel messengers and human messengers are two different things. So we just have to have an open mind when we come across the word messenger or angel, you know, to determine whether this is a celestial being or a terrestrial being. And the New King James is trying to help us out because in verse 1 it calls them angels, which in English we just naturally associate with celestial beings. And here in verse 3 they're called messengers, which we would have more of a tendency to think is referring to humans. And I'm sure that's correct, but just be aware in the Hebrew Bible it's the same word. So Yaakov sent messengers before him to Esav, his brother. One thing I will mention is that in English we pronounce that name Esau. It's kind of a wa sound at the end. The AU sound is kind of a wa sound. The majority of scholars, I'm certain it's the majority of scholars who are familiar with the biblical languages, with Hebrew, say that in biblical times, the last letter of Esav's name, and I've got it highlighted here, it looks like a lowercase I. It's this letter right here that I'm waving the pointer over. That is, um, I call it a vav, which is a V sound. Uh, but most of these, like I say, the majority of scholars call that a wow, a W sound. And so that kind of accounts for the difference in pronunciation, whether it's Esau or Esav. I say Esav, and every Jew on the planet agrees with me. The Vav sound or the V sound for the end of Esav's name is from the Sephardic pronunciation, which originated in Spain. Actually, it originated in the Promised Land, but Jews who were banished from many of the Jews who were banished from the Promised Land, either in the Roman conquest or earlier conquest, many of them gravitated to Spain. They went to Spain, and so Sephard is the Hebrew word for Spain. And like other banished Jews went to Europe, and those are called the Ashkenazi Jews. So the exiles to Spain and the exiles to Europe are two different groups, the Sephardim and the Ashkenazim, separated by a lot of geography, but when in exile, they brought with them the Hebrew language, and both groups pronounce the Vav as a V sound. Now, it's not a big deal with Esau's name because we don't really know. Uh, how do I want to say this? He's not that significant in the Bible. He's kind of a lower caste member. But there's also a Vav in the sacred name of God. And so most of the scholars would pronounce his name Yahweh with a W sound. But I believe that the modern day Jews are right and that they have preserved the proper pronunciation of the Vav. And I would pronounce it Yahweh with a V sound. And I don't know how important that is, but it's not as important that you pronounce Esav's name correctly. It's much more important that if you're going to pronounce God's name at all, that you pronounce it correctly. And I think the proper pronunciation is Yahweh. But also, just about every Jew on the planet would say you're not supposed to say it at all. And they say one of the reasons you're not supposed to say it is because nobody really knows how it's pronounced, how it's supposed to be pronounced. And that is alluding to the discussion we just had about, some scholars say it's a wow sound and some people say it's a vav sound. But a more important reason to not pronounce the sacred name of God is to avoid even getting close to violating the commandments that says, thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. Okay, so Esav, the name that he was given at birth, I believe that means hairy, like Hairy. And so that was one of the names he was given. He goes and lives in the land of Seir. Seir is a mountain, actually a mountain range, kind of in the southern part of the Promised Land. Actually, even outside, south and east of the biblical era extent of the Promised Land. So it's a mountain called Seir, and Seir is the Hebrew word for hair, Hair, or hairy. So it would be two Hebrew words that kind of mean the same thing. But then the country that he lives in, the country that is named after him is Edom, which is the Hebrew word for red. So when he was born, he was hairy and he was red. So all these names, his given name, the name of the mountain where he lives, and the name of the country that's named after him, are named after the various aspects of his name. Okay, Genesis 32:4. And he commanded them, Yaakov is sending his human messenger, saying, speak thus to my Lord Esav. Thus your servant Yaakov says, I have dwelt with Lavan, uh, and that would be Rachel and Leah's dad, and stayed there until now. And that period of time is 20 years. Verse 5, he says, I have oxen, donkeys, flocks, male and female servants, and I've sent to tell my Lord. Now, when he says my Lord here, notice that in our English it's spelled with a lowercase l, which makes us think he's not talking about God, the Lord as God. But he's talking about someone he is addressing respectfully. In English, it would be like calling a male sir or mister. Lord, Adon, in Hebrew is the way you would do that if you want to do that. So here highlighted in the Hebrew text is the word Adon. The first three letters, Aleph, Dalet, and Nun, are highlighted, but the Hirik Yod ending here, the little Yod doesn't get highlighted because it's an ending, and it means my Lord, Adoni, which is singular. It means that the Lord part of this is in the singular, so he's just addressing one person. A more common form of this word Adon is Adonai, and instead of having a Hirik Yod on the end, it has a, what is that? A Patach Yod. Patach Yod. Adonai makes the Adon part plural, just like Elohim, the word for God, is plural. So when you refer to God as Adonai, you are addressing three persons. You are addressing a plurality of persons, but within the context of a singular Godhead. Why is he sent to his Lord Esav, his brother, whom he has great respect for, and some fear for? So that Yaakov says he wants that I may find favor in your sight, in the sight of Esav. So what is this word favor? It is the Hebrew word chen, and it literally means for nothing. And in context, what it usually means is being given something that you don't deserve. So chen, here in the English is translated favor, but usually it's translated grace. Both of those are correct. So basically what Jacob is saying here is, Esau, I hope I find grace or favor in your sight because I don't deserve it. I haven't done anything to rate it like as a reward for my goodness to you. But he says, I hope I can find grace in your sight. So what would be a synonym for that? I think it could be I find that I find grace in your sight, favor in your sight. Yeah. That I hope you will accept me, like you have no reason to accept me for nothing in your sight. And that's the way we hope God, our Lord, our Adonai, will accept us, because we have sins and we've offended him with our behavior, thoughts, words, and deeds. So we hope we find favor in his sight. God would be perfectly justified to judge us and to send us to eternal hell and damnation, but we pray that we might find favor in his sight. Another word for grace is chesed, which we will come across here briefly, shortly, I mean. Verse 6, then the messengers, the malachim, returned to Yaakov, the human messengers, I'll say, to Yaakov, saying, we came to your brother Esav, and he also is coming to meet you. So far, so good, right? But then they go on to say, and 400 men are with him. Now, Jacob's got a big family, but not that big. So what is that telling you? Or what is that telling Yaakov? It's telling him Esau is coming out to meet him with an army, possibly to destroy him. And he has good reason for feeling this way, because when after Yaakov had gained his brother Esau's birthright, and then his blessing, the blessing of the firstborn of the family, Esau vowed to kill him. And I think the way Esau phrased it is, after my father, Yitzhak, dies, then I'll kill Yaakov because I don't want to hurt dad's feelings. So that's kind of the last thing that Yaakov knew. It's 20 years later now. And there's a possibility, and Yaakov hopes that Esau's anger has died down and that he will survive this meeting. But when he hears 400 men are coming with his brother, then he's going to start having some grave doubts. So Yaakov was greatly distressed. What's the word we have here for distress? I think the verse numbers are off here at this point. Let's see. So Yaakov was, yira. That's just the common word for fear. And distressed, what's that word? Me'od vayetzer lo yachatz, divided. That's yeah, distress. Okay, so he divided the people. Yaakov divided the people that were with him, and the flocks and the herds and camels into two companies, machanot, literally means a plurality of camps. And let's see, verse 8, and he, Yaakov said, if Esau comes to one company and attacks it, so he's thinking the 400 are soldiers, and they're going to come and attack him, and he's afraid that Esau is going to make good on his vow and try to kill him. So Yaakov says, and I think he says this to himself. I doubt if he says this to anybody else, but he says, if Esau comes to one company and attacks it, then the other company, which is left, will escape. Now, let's say the companies are divided up according to the wives. Maybe his camp, Yaakov's people are divided into two groups, and one is the group of Rachel, and the other is the group of Leah. Maybe it's four camps. Maybe it's Rachel and Leah, and then Zilpah and Bilhah. I hope I got those names, the servants' names right. So it may be four camps. So which one do you think he will put in the front, closest to Esau, and which one do you think he will put in the rear? I think Rachel's going to be at the very back. And Yaakov has already explained this. Like, if the first group of my family that encounters Esau gets destroyed, gets massacred, the rest of us are going to run for it. And, hopefully we'll be able to escape with our lives. But he wants to make sure that Rachel and her child, and then that part of the family's possessions, have the best chance of surviving. Then he's going to pray, which is a good thing. So we know that Yaakov is afraid and distressed. Then Yaakov said, "O Elohim," actually Elohe Avi, God of my father Abraham and God of my father Yitzhak. Here's the sacred name of God. Instead of pronouncing it as it should be pronounced, I'm going to call the Lord Adonai. The vowels that you see here, which are the dots at the bottom of the name, are the vowels not for the sacred name itself, but for Adonai. So when a person familiar with Hebrew reads this, they'll see those vowels and they'll say, oh, I'm supposed to say Adonai instead of the sacred name. So Lord with all caps means it's the Lord's sacred name. And we'll just follow that Jewish tradition of saying Adonai. The God of my father Abraham, the God of my father Isaac, Adonai, who said to me, now he's recalling a promise that God made to him. When it was time for him to return to the promised land of Canaan, God told him to go. So he's reminding God of what God had said. The Lord said to me, return to your country and to your family, and I will deal well with you. That sounds like survival. So Yaakov is reminding God that he had promised that Yaakov would be okay, that he would be well. And this may seem like a presumptuous thing to do, but it's the thing God is looking for, because this prayer is a prayer of faith. And we don't want to just base our faith on our feelings or emotions about God. We want to base our faith on God's promises. Remember the age of promise. This is a promise that God made. Return to your country, you and your family, and I will deal well with you. And Jacob's just saying, Lord, I'm going to take you up on your promise. Because if you are who my whole family says you are, you'll keep that promise, and I will be dealt well with. And then we have verse 10 here. And I'm going to read it through in English. Then I'm going to share a little bit more about it with you. Verse 10, Genesis 32:10. Yaakov is saying about himself, I am not worthy of the least of all the mercies and of all the truth which you have shown your servant. Those are powerful and truthful words. He goes on to say, for I crossed over this Yarden, the river, with my staff, and now I have become two companies, machanot. The thing I want to mention to you is there is a beautiful song, and you can find videos and probably just audio recordings of this song on, I know you can on YouTube and probably other places too. The song is called Katanti. And I think if you wanted to find it, you would search on Katonti. I believe that would do it. And my favorite performer that sings this song is Elihana. That's her first name. Elea is her second name. And these are the lyrics to that song, and she sings them straight out of the Bible. Katanti mikol chasadim umikol ha'emet asher atzita et avdecha. And then she goes on. I don't do it justice. If you want to hear a beautiful song sung in Hebrew, and if you get the video portion, it shows the Hebrew words, but it also shows the English translation at the bottom. So you can learn a little Hebrew that way and just get to hear this beautiful language of the Bible, the holy language, the Lashon HaKodesh. So yeah, a great song, great prayer. Jacob goes on in his prayer, verse 11, deliver me, I pray, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him. Yirah, again, basic word for fear, lest he come and attack me and the mother with the children. So he's afraid for himself. Esau vowed to kill Jacob, but he's afraid that if Esau is still angry, that he'll kill everybody in his family and maybe take all the flocks and herds for himself because he figures he's got it coming to him. So that's the fear that he has. Verse 12, for you said, you with a capital Y. So there are no capitals in the Hebrew Old Testament. but the New King James translators are trying to help us out here. So they give us a capital Y. That's God. You, God said, I will surely treat you well and make your descendants as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for multitude. That is part of the Abrahamic covenant. God promised a multitude of people in this family. He promised it to Abraham. Then he repeated the promise to Yitzhak. He's now has repeated the promise to Yaakov, and Yaakov's taken him up on it. Yaakov is saying to God, I've got a big family, but this family needs to survive in order to become so numerous that our numbers will be comparable to the, grains of sand on the seashore and the stars in the heavens, something like that. Um, yeah, that is, that's probably figurative language and, well, what do they call that? Anyway, it's kind of a extreme way of expressing it. But if Yaakov's family ends right here, then that promise of God ends right here. So once again, he's reminding God of his promises. So we're seeing how Yaakov is praying, and I'm trying to make a case that he's a righteous man and a good example for us in our prayers. When you go to God asking him to do something for you, if you have a promise from the scriptures that he has made concerning that thing, let's say you're sick. Maybe you've gotten a bad diagnosis from your doctor. Maybe you've got cancer or some disease. And it might be very frightening. It might be incapacitating. It might even take your life. If you go to God with promises he has made about healing, that's the best thing you can do. And that's what God is looking for. He's looking for somebody who's familiar with the promises that he's made and who believes that those things will come to pass. So God wants that. So if you are sick, like what Bible verses would you take to God? One of them might be from Isaiah 53. This is a prophecy of Yeshua. When Yeshua was on the cross, he bore our sicknesses and our injuries. I think that's 53:4. And then verse 5 says, by his stripes we are healed. Actually, it says we were healed, or we have been healed. Psalm 103 says, praise the Lord, O my soul, and forget not all his benefits. God forgives all your sins and heals all your diseases. Those are great promises. Psalm 103 covers every disease that you will ever encounter. God has made promises about that. So take his promises to him and just say, Lord, I believe that you are a promise keeper, that if you make a promise, you'll keep it. I believe it applies to me. I believe you. I trust you. I'm just placing my life in your hands and expecting that miracle of healing. So this is a great way to pray. Verse 13. So he lodged there that same night and took what came to his hand as a present for Esav, his brother. Now, what follows is going to be a huge list of animals, like way more animals than I envision as I try to imagine what this company of his family looks like moving south. It's a lot of animals. So maybe he's giving them all to Esau and he'll just start over. I mean, God gave him that wealth and those livestock. So maybe if in order to survive, he can kind of buy off his brother with all of his livestock, he's willing to do it. Maybe just a portion of it goes to Esau. So as we go through the itinerary here, as the livestock are listed off here in huge numbers, this may be what Yaakov plans to give to Esau, all of it, or maybe just a portion of it goes to him. Maybe the gift is just a portion of it. So we'll read through the animals we've got here. 200 female goats, 20 male goats, 200 ewes, and 20 rams. 30 milk camels with their colts, 40 cows and 10 bulls, 20 female donkeys, and 10 foals. So that's a lot of animals. Um, hundreds, hundreds of some of those animals. Anyway, maybe that's the gift. Maybe that's all Yaakov has. Um, but at least part or all of that is going to be the gift that he plans to give to Esau. Then he delivered them, the livestock, to the hand of his servants. And I think these servants are from the different camps, either 2 camps or 4 camps. The hand of his servants, every drove by itself. And he said to his servants, pass over before me and put some distance between successive droves. So he's sending his family members and servants ahead of him. It sounds like he's going to lead from the back. And, we may explain this out of fear, or the fact that if you are herding sheep anyway, you do it from the rear. And, you kind of ride off to the sides, or you run off to the sides and, try to keep them together in a group. But that's usually done from the rear. So he says, pass over before me. Now, when it says pass over before me, iver is the Hebrew word for that. It's highlighted in the Hebrew Bible. Iver means to cross over or pass over. And it is the 3-letter verbal root for the name of the language, Yivrit, Hebrew. In these early days of the Bible, the chosen people were not called Jews. That doesn't happen until like around the Babylonian captivity. They weren't called Israelites because Israel hasn't yet become a nation. So they were called Yivrim. They were called Hebrews. And here he says, pass over, probably because the family of Abraham passed over the Euphrates River in coming to Canaan. He also passed over the Jordan River in coming to Canaan. So it's a family that does a lot of river crossing. And here Yaakov is sending his servants and his livestock over the river. And I forget from the map what the river is. Maybe it's the Yavok. I'm not sure what the river is. So put some distance between successive droves. And he commanded the first one, saying, when Esav, my brother, meets you and asks you, saying, to whom do you belong? And where are you going? And whose are these in front of you? These in front of you are the livestock, all the goats and sheep and camels and whatever else they've got there. Verse 18, then you shall say, they are your servant Yaakov's. It is a present sent to my Lord Esav. So again, we've got Adoni here, my Lord Esav, just a term of respect for his brother. So he's trying to court his favor by addressing him politely. And behold, he also is behind us. The he is Yaakov. So the servant is supposed to say, he, Yaakov, is behind us. So he commanded the second, the third. So I said I didn't know whether the camp was divided into 2 groups or 4 groups. It sounds like 4 to me. So he sent that one first, then the second and the third, and all who followed the drove, saying, in this manner you shall speak to Esav when you find him. So if Esav is going to get to Yaakov to do him harm, he's going to have to go through 4 groups of people, probably with Yaakov at the very tail end. And also say, behold, your servant Yaakov is behind us. For he said, I will appease him with the present that goes before me, and afterward I will see his face, and perhaps he will accept me. The Hebrew word is Yisa, which means to lift up. So he'll lift up his face upon me. When we receive the priestly blessing, the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine on you. The Lord lift up his countenance on you and give you peace. So when God lifts up his countenance on us, then it's a blessing to us. That's what Yaakov is hoping Esau will do. Esau will lift up his face upon Yaakov and give him peace, accept him. So the present or the livestock went on over before him, but he lodged that night in the camp. So it sounds like to me the family made camp at one location north of this river. But he's sending the groups, like the day before, he sends the groups on ahead to approach Esau, but he himself is still on the north side of the river with his family members. So he lodged that night in the camp, and he arose that night and took his 2 wives and his 2 female servants and his 11 sons and crossed over the ford of Yavok. I was right. It's the Yavok River. And he took them and sent them over the brook and sent over what he had. So they all crossed over to the south side of the Yavok River. Then Yaakov was left alone. Now, I don't know if he crossed back to the north side of the river or if he remained on the south side of the river, just at the rear of the camp of the family groups. Then Yaakov was left alone, and a man. The Hebrew word is an ish, but notice the New King James translators have capitalized M, the M in man. So is that an indication that this man that Yaakov wrestles with is actually God? Well, let's keep reading through the text and see if we can determine for sure. So he was left alone, and a man wrestled with him. The man wrestled with him, Yaakov, until the breaking of day. So they're wrestling all night long. And if I'm Yaakov, I'm thinking, I got enough trouble on my hands. And then this guy shows up and starts wrestling with me. Like, I don't need this. So verse 25, now when he saw that he did not prevail against him. Now I think the he here, again, no capitals in the Hebrew, but it sounds like the man that was wrestling with Yaakov saw that the man who wrestled with him, did not prevail against him. If this is God, then Yaakov is wrestling with God and winning. And that point is going to be significant here in a few minutes. He with a capital H, and again, no capitals in Hebrew, but I think they're right. This person who's wrestling with Yaakov touched the socket of Yaakov's hip. And the socket of Yaakov's hip was out of joint. Now, I've never had my hip out of joint, but I guess it can happen. And it's probably a very painful thing. Like I would go to the clinic or I would go to the ER in the hospital. Yaakov's not going to be able to do that. So his hip is out of joint as he wrestles with him. And he, with a capital H, the wrestling man, said, "Let me go, for the day breaks." Now, some people would say he's a vampire because I guess sunlight is bad for vampires, for what I'm not an expert on vampires. But this is no vampire. This is an ordinary man, or it is one of the 3 persons of the Trinity. And if it's one of the 3 persons of the Trinity, he's saying to Yaakov, "Let me go before the day breaks." But he said with a small h, Yaakov said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." So why would Yaakov want to be blessed by an ordinary man who's a nuisance to him, who's wrestling with him, when he's got a lot on his mind? I think Yaakov suspects that these pronouns with a capital letter are correct, that he's wrestling with God. So he with a capital H said to him, "What is your name?" Now, if this is God, he knows his name, right? But this may be important for what follows. I'm not trying to suggest that God is lacking in knowledge, but sometimes he asks these questions because he's about to do something significant, referring to that question that he asked, referring to Yaakov's name. So he said, and here the H is capitalized only because it's the beginning of a sentence. So Yaakov said, Yaakov. He said, he named himself as Yaakov. And he, with a capital H that's not at the beginning of the sentence, says, your name shall no longer be called Yaakov, but Israel, for you have struggled with God and with men and have prevailed. So this is where Yaakov's name gets changed. And who's changing it? I think it's God. And the man he's been wrestling with says, for you have struggled, sarit. And if we go down to the information window at the bottom of the page, it shows that as, it shows the root, and it's sin resh hey. So that's the root word of sarit. The hey at the end of the word goes away when you add the suffix. And it means to strive. And of course, another word for that would be to wrestle. So you have struggled, sarit, im Elohim, with God, ve'im anashim, and with men, and have prevailed. Tukal means to prevail, to be able to like win the wrestling match. So at what other time has Yaakov struggled with God or wrestled with God? This is the only time. And so this person that I'm going to start calling God now says, you've struggled with God. You've been wrestling with me all night. But he says, you've also been struggling with men. So who are the men that he's been struggling with? Well, Esav, 20 years ago, Laban, who met him in Gilad, and if God hadn't intervened, probably would have done him harm. He's about to struggle with Esav again, or potentially struggle with Esav again, if Esav is. But then he says, you have prevailed. So let's. His name is changed to Israel. So if we look at the name over here, Israel. This part of the word here, the sin and the resh, is part of the word for struggle. This is also the word for a prince. So if we go over here to Dake's notes, we see that Israel means prince, but it also means prevailed or ruled as a prince. So yeah, the sar part means to wrestle. The Aleph and Lamed part on the end here, the El is short for Elohim, so you've wrestled with God. Israel means wrestled with God, but it's not limited to wrestling with God. So if Yaakov had lost the wrestling match, then he would not have been called Israel. He would have been called something else, because the Sar part also means to be victorious. So Yaakov is like a prince. He's royalty in what is going to be a royal nation. So he's a prince. But a prince is only a prince if he's victorious. So usually in a kingdom, like the father is the king and his son is a prince. And usually the king doesn't go out and fight battles, but he sends his son, the prince, out to win battles. If his son loses the battle, he's no longer a prince because he's dead. So if you win the battles that your father, the king, sends you to, then you're a prince. So if you survive as a prince and eventually become the king, then that means you've been victorious in all of your battles. Because in biblical days, if you lost a battle, you didn't go home. You died on the battlefield. So what God is saying to Yaakov is, you are a prince of God, meaning you have won the battle. So this wrestling match is over with, but Yaakov is anticipating another battle to come with his brother Esav. So the fact that God has changed his name, the meaning of his name, Israel, means that he's going to be victorious over Esav also, because he struggled with God and with men. And Esau is just another man that he's going to struggle with during his life. But because God has called him a victorious prince of God, it means he's going to win these battles. So that should ease his fear a little bit. Then Yaakov asks, saying, "Tell me your name, I pray." Now, when you hear that, probably the first thing that pops into your mind is the conversation we've been having in this study about the sacred name of God. Is Yaakov saying, "Oh God, tell me your name. Tell me the sacred name." Maybe that's what he's asking. Moses asks that. God calls him to be the deliverer of God's chosen people in Egypt. And Moses says, they're going to ask me what your name is. So what should I tell them? And that's where God reveals to Moses that his name is Yod-Heh Vav-Heh, YHVH. Now, that doesn't imply that men were unfamiliar with the sacred name of God before Jacob requested to hear it here, because all the way back into Genesis chapter 2, the name is revealed in the scriptures, and it's revealed to, and people are saying God's name right and left all through the Bible up until the Babylonian captivity. So people know his name. But Jacob is here saying, "Tell me your name." It is a sacred name, and not every wrestler would know it. So this is kind of Jacob asking God for an ID. And he, with a capital H, God says, "Why is it that you ask about my name?" It's a question, but there's no answer given, and the name is not revealed here. I think Yaakov already knows the name. So I think Yaakov is saying, "I know the name of the one true God. You tell me what your name is, and we'll see if they match up." And God basically says, "Why are you asking me my name?" Maybe because he knows that Yaakov already knows the name, and he doesn't have to give any ID. And he, with a capital H, blessed him, Yaakov. So God blessed Yaakov there. So Yaakov called the name of the place Peniel. So up here we have the Hebrew of Peniel, which means Pani means my face, short for Elohim. So in other words, I have come face to face, like my face has seen God. We've been wrestling all night. So I have seen God face to face. So because that happened there, he calls the name of that place Peniel. I think on the map it may have called it Penuel, um, which would, I guess, would be kind of like seen by God or something like that. For I have seen God face to face, and my life is preserved. So that's why he called it that. So I don't know what that location was called before this happened, but after it happened, it was called Peniel. And everybody, who lived in Israel knew the name of that place, and they knew the significance of this biblical event that had taken place there. So verse 31, just as he crossed over, so I'm thinking Yaakov is crossing over the Yavok River. That's what it's saying here. Um, so that's what leads me to believe that he was on the north side, and the wrestling match took place on the north side. So he crossed over Penuel, and here it's Penuel. So up here it's Peniel. So what is it here? Penuel. So the yod in the middle of the word here is changed to a vav, which is very common. And I think it's just changing the tense. Uh, this is either their face, which could be a reference to the three persons of the Trinity, or his face, just one of the persons of the Trinity, and then the L. Okay. So just as he crossed over Penuel, the sun rose on him, and he limped on his hip. Because, like I say, he couldn't go to the first aid clinic, couldn't go to the ER because he's out there in the desert. Therefore, to this day, the children of Israel, the Bnei Israel, do not eat the muscle that shrank, which is on the hip socket, because he touched the socket of Yaakov's hip in the muscle that shrank. Now, this does not mean that Israelites eat people. Yes, I know it was Yaakov's human hip that was put out of, out of joint, and I guess but because of the dislocation, probably the muscle shrank around it, which probably caused it to be out of joint for the rest of his life. So he probably had to walk with a staff or something like that. And in the song Katanti, he talks about crossing over the Yarden with his staff. Okay, so yeah, so what does this mean? If it doesn't mean that Israelites eat people, it means that uh, when they eat the flesh of an animal, and eventually it's going to be just kosher animals. But I mean, biblical people knew about clean animals and unclean animals. So we're not talking about pigs. So we're talking about sheep or goats or, larger animals that are edible. So when they eat that, they do not eat the muscle that shrank. So that hip, whether it was the right hip or left hip, I don't know, but they don't eat that part. They just leave that. And it's not that like something supernatural is going to happen to him. It's just that they do that to remember this story and the significance of it. Because in this event of Yaakov wrestling with God, his name gets changed. And this happens as a result of his prayer and his righteousness, not his sinlessness, but his righteousness, his faith in God. His name gets changed and his life gets changed also. So from here on, um, we will apply a little test to the remaining stories of Yaakov in the Bible. And I think you will find that if Yaakov is being portrayed in a good light as a man of faith, the Bible's going to refer to him as Israel. If he's not doing so well, if he's stumbling in his faith and making mistakes, then he's going to be called Yaakov. So I think that's one of the subtle ways that the Bible is going to talk about the good side of Israel and the bad side of Yaakov. Same guy, two sides to his character. Okay, that's the end of our chapter. So let me give you the Old Testament blessing. I will give you the blessing of the priest, the priestly blessing for Numbers chapter 6. And this is one of the probably few contexts in the Old Testament where I think the sacred name of God needs to be used and placed on God's people. And that's what I want to do for you tonight. In the verse following the priestly blessing, it says, in this way you will place God's name on God's people. So here we go. Yivalechecha Yahweh, vayishmarecha, Ya'er Yahweh, panav elecha, vayuhunecha, Isa Yahweh, panav elecha, vayasem lecha shalom. And that means Yahweh bless you and keep you. Yahweh make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. Yahweh lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Shalom, dear friends. Hope we see you next time for chapter 33.